Imagine walking along a quiet, rocky shore as waves crash softly and seagulls cry overhead. Then you see it, a single sneaker washed up on the sand. You lean closer and realize there's still a human foot inside. That's not the setup to a horror movie. It actually happened, and not just once. Over the past 2 decades, along the coastlines of British Columbia and Washington State, dozens of severed human feet, still wearing their sneakers, have washed ashore. There were no torsos, no skulls, no other body parts, just the feet, always the feet. Police, scientists, and journalists have been baffled for years. Was it a serial killer, a plane crash, a natural phenomenon, or something far stranger? Today, we're diving deep into one of the most bizarre, unsolved mysteries in modern forensic history, the case of the floating feet. It all began in August 2007. A 12-year-old girl was walking along a beach on Jedediah Island, just off the coast of British Columbia, when she spotted an old Adidas sneaker half buried in the sand. Curious, she picked it up and screamed. Inside the shoe was a human foot, partially decomposed, still wearing a sock. Police arrived thinking this was a one-time tragedy. A boating accident maybe, or someone lost at sea. But 6 days later, another foot appeared. A different shoe on a different beach, also a right foot, also human. And at that point, authorities knew this wasn't just coincidence. The odds of 2 random, unconnected human feet washing ashore in the same region within a week are about 1 in a million. And it didn't stop there. Over the next 18 years, at least 23 feet were found along the shores of the Salish Sea, the body of water that separates Canada from the U.S. state of Washington. Some of them matched and formed pairs. Most did not. The media went wild, and locals panicked. Investigators were left with the question haunting everyone: who were these people? And why were their feet showing up without the rest of their bodies? Investigators were desperate for answers. Dozens of feet, but no bodies, no clear victims, no obvious cause. Maybe, they thought, all those feet came from passengers lost in a single disaster. It made a strange kind of sense. When a small aircraft goes down over water, the impact is brutal. Even at moderate speed, the surface hits like concrete. The plane often breaks apart on impact, and the people inside are thrown into the sea with incredible force. Investigators remembered that in 2005, just 2 years before the first foot was found, a small twin-engine plane vanished near the San Juan Islands. It went down in the same stretch of water between Vancouver and Washington State. Divers later recovered pieces of the fuselage from the seabed, but no human remains were found inside. Only a few unbuckled seatbelts and scraps of fabric. It was possible, they thought, that the missing passengers were out there somewhere, slowly coming apart under pressure and time. Forensic experts backed up that idea. When a plane hits the ocean, bodies can break apart naturally, and not from cutting or deliberate violence, but from the raw energy of impact. At that speed, water tears metal and bone alike. In one famous case, Egypt Air Flight 990 in 1999, search teams recovered more than 6,000 small fragments of human tissue, each only a few centimeters wide. That's what happens when tons of metal hit the sea at hundreds of kilometers per hour. So maybe, detectives thought, the floating feet were just the last recognizable remains from a single crash. The only parts protected by tough sneakers and cold water. But there was a problem. The math didn't add up. The missing plane had only 4 people on board, yet by 2008, investigators had already found more than 5 separate feet, and they weren't pairs. The DNA didn't match any of the known passengers. The theory that once seemed so perfect suddenly fell apart. Whatever was happening out there in the Salish Sea, it wasn't a single accident. It was something stranger and much, much bigger. When the plane crash theory fell apart, investigators turned to something even bigger. The ocean itself? Some experts suggested the feet might have traveled from across the world, carried by powerful currents after a distant disaster. They pointed to the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, which killed over 180,000 people and swept thousands out to sea. Could the ocean have carried their remains all the way to North America? It sounded wild, but possible. After all, in 2011, debris from Japan's tsunami, even a motorcycle inside a container, washed up on beaches in Canada and the US. If a bike could drift across the Pacific, why not a shoe? For a moment, the theory made sense, but DNA tests crushed it. None of the victims came from Asia. All were local Canadians and Americans. So once again, the case slipped away like the tide. Whatever was happening in these waters, it wasn't coming from across the ocean. And if nature couldn't explain it, maybe someone could. So police considered the obvious. Murder. Maybe a killer was dismembering victims and dumping them at sea. It would explain the clean separations, the isolated limbs, the shoes still perfectly laced. And British Columbia, as it turned out, had no shortage of dark history to make that theory horrifyingly plausible. This wasn't just a peaceful Pacific coastline. It was a region haunted by decades of disappearances and violence. Just a few years earlier, the country had been shaken by the arrest of Robert Picton, the pig farmer from Port Coquitlam, who confessed to killing and butchering women on his property. Detectives recovered remains of 33 victims, though they suspected many more. Picton's farm was only 30 kilometers from where some of the first severed feet washed up, and he had dissolved flesh in acid, fed body parts to pigs, and mixed human remains with animal feed. So when the media heard about feet turning up in sneakers along the coast, it didn't sound like a coincidence. Could these be Picton's final victims? Or worse, had someone taken inspiration from him? The idea seemed plausible, after all. Serial killers often cluster geographically, and this part of British Columbia already had another scar. The infamous Highway of Tears. It's a lonely, forest-lined stretch of Highway 16 where, since the late 1970s, over 100 Indigenous women have vanished. Many were last seen hitchhiking. Some were found murdered. Most were never found at all. For Indigenous families, the discovery of more human remains near the coast reignited old fears that predators were still out there, taking advantage of the remote wilderness and indifferent authorities. To the public, it looked like a pattern. To detectives, it looked like a nightmare repeating itself. But then the evidence started contradicting the story everyone wanted to believe. For one thing, the forensic reports didn't match any signs of human interference. None of the recovered feet showed clean tool marks, saw cuts, or incisions. Nothing that would suggest deliberate amputation. Instead, the tissue separation looked natural, more like what happens when ligaments decay over time underwater. There was no bruising, no clear trauma, no hesitation wounds, just bone, tendon, and decay. Forensic anthropologists examined the first few shoes under microscopes, expecting to find trace evidence, rope fibers, stray DNA, residues from chemicals, but found nothing. No sign of foul play, just the ocean doing what it does best, breaking down what it takes. So if not murder, then what? When detectives finally ruled it out, they turned to another theory. Some scientists floated a theory, literally, that the feet belonged to people who died in accidents. Those who'd fallen from ferries, gone missing while swimming, or taken their own lives at sea. But why would their feet separate so cleanly? And why were they showing up so many years later? To answer that, we have to go beneath the waves. When a body sinks in cold seawater, decomposition slows dramatically. The cold preserves the tissue, while bacteria inside the body still generate gas. Normally, that gas buildup makes a corpse rise back to the surface within a few days, face down, which is why most drowning victims are found that way. But the Salish Sea is different. It's deep and it's cold. The water rarely gets warmer than 10 degrees Celsius. Down on the seabed, pressure prevents those gases from expanding. So instead of floating up, bodies often stay pinned to the ocean floor for months or even years. In that state, a strange process begins. Adipocere formation, sometimes called grave wax. Body fat slowly turns into a waxy soap-like substance that seals the tissue and helps preserve it in the cold. That explained the condition of the feet. Not fresh, but not fully skeletonized either. Still, it didn't explain why the feet separated from the bodies at all. Here's where things get creepy. And in a morbid way, kind of brilliant. Forensic oceanographers began running underwater experiments using pig carcasses because pig tissue decomposes almost identically to human flesh. They placed the bodies at different depths and recorded what happened. Within just 4 days, the carcasses were swarmed, not by sharks or big fish, but by crabs, lobsters, and shrimp. These scavengers devoured the soft tissue in record time, focusing on the joints, knees, ankles, and wrists where ligaments are weakest. After about 2 weeks, the pig's feet literally detached and fell off intact, just as the human ones had. The cause wasn't murder, it was nature. The missing link had finally appeared. Crustaceans were the culprits. They feasted on the bodies of drowned or sunken victims, weakening and severing the feet naturally over time. Then, thanks to another eerie twist of fate, those freed feet began to float. And here's the twist that ties everything together. It was the shoes. Before the late 1980s, sneakers were heavy. Most had thick, solid rubber soles that sank as soon as they hit the water. If a person drowned, their shoes would go straight to the bottom and stay there. But in 1987, everything changed. That year, Nike released the Air Max 1, the first sneaker with a visible air bubble in the sole. It wasn't just a design flex. Inside that clear window was a small chamber of pressurized air, sealed in a light plastic called polyurethane. The result was a shoe that felt softer and lighter, and without anyone realizing it, a shoe that could float. Soon other brands joined in. Adidas rolled out its torsion systems. Reebok launched Pump. Asics pushed their gel soles. By the early 1990s, almost every major sports shoe had moved from solid rubber to lighter foams and plastics that trapped air inside. For runners, it meant comfort. For the ocean, it meant buoyancy. Those new soles acted like tiny life rafts, keeping the feet at the surface while the rest of the body sank and broke apart below. Older shoes, the ones without air pockets or foam, would have stayed buried on the seabed forever. But these new sneakers helped the feet eventually rise, sometimes years later, carried by currents until they reached shore. Scientists even tested the idea and found that a modern running shoe can float in seawater for years, sometimes more than 10, depending on waves and salinity. That timeline matched almost perfectly with the first discoveries in 2007. It explained why the mystery seemed to begin suddenly. Those first air-filled shoes from the late 1980s were finally starting to wash up. It's strangely poetic, isn't it? A design meant to make running more comfortable ended up helping human feet rise to the surface. Decades later, a small bubble of air, created purely for cushioning, turned sneakers into floating time capsules. That's why, after the late 1980s, human feet began washing ashore in this part of the world, and almost nowhere else. In the end, the answer wasn't a killer hiding in the shadows, it was technology drifting quietly back to shore. And this strange connection between shoes and the sea isn't just theory, it's been proven before. In 1990, a cargo ship called the Hansa Carrier was caught in a massive storm in the North Pacific. 5 of its containers went overboard, spilling more than 60,000 brand new Nike sneakers into the ocean. For months, those shoes floated across thousands of kilometers, carried by wind and currents. They started washing up on beaches from Canada to Hawaii, sometimes still perfectly paired, sometimes separated by miles. Oceanographers realized they could track the paths of those sneakers to map Pacific currents. A real-world science experiment born from an accident. That event showed just how powerful ocean movement can be and how far a single floating shoe can travel. So when human feet in modern sneakers began appearing along the same coastlines years later, scientists already knew it was possible. The same forces that carried those lost Nikes across the Pacific were also carrying pieces of people quietly, steadily, back to shore. Even the direction of the drift could be explained. Oceanographers discovered that right and left shoes floated slightly differently because of their asymmetrical shape. Right shoes tended to turn north toward Canada, while left shoes more often drifted south toward the US. The current was literally sorting the limbs by side. That's why so many discoveries clustered in the same coastal zone, the Salish Sea, a semi-enclosed body of water bordered by Vancouver Island and Washington State. Its geography and currents made it the perfect trap, a marine graveyard where nothing could truly escape. But one more question still hung in the air. If all of this was natural, why did the discoveries start so suddenly? Why weren't people finding these feet decades earlier? The answer is simple and eerie. Most of the people identified so far vanished long before 2007. Some disappeared as early as 1987, the same year the first buoyant Air Max shoes were released. Others were victims of accidents, drownings, and suicides spread across the following decades. It just took time, sometimes years, for water, depth, and scavengers to do their work before the feet finally broke free and floated up. So no, there was no serial killer lurking off Vancouver's coast. No cult, no military cover-up. Just a series of tragic drownings, a few morbid coincidences, and a perfect storm of science, geography, and modern footwear. In the end, investigators identified most of the victims through eDNA. Many were people who had gone missing at sea, their cases long cold. In a way, those shoes brought them home. But the mystery isn't completely over. Even now, new feet occasionally appear. The most recent found in 2023. Each time it happens, locals feel that same chill, that same rush of questions. Who was it this time? And how long had they been down there? There's something deeply human about this story. Not just in the science, but in the symbolism. Every sneaker once held a life. Someone wore it, walked in it, ran in it, and then, for reasons we may never fully know, they vanished into the ocean, only for their shoes to return years later as grim messengers from the deep. It's a reminder of how fragile our connection to the world really is. One slip, and you see an old sneaker lying in the sand. You might catch yourself wondering, is there still a story inside it?